Hello, welcome to the podcast המדע מחפש משמעות, or in English, Science and Meaning. Today I have a special episode in English, but also extremely special because of the person that I'm meeting. It's an honor and a pleasure to meet Professor Roald Hoffmann. Roald Hoffmann is a chemist, a poet, a playwright, recipient of the 1981 Nobel Prize in Chemistry at the age of 44. And today he's a professor emeritus at Cornell University. And to me, it's a special honor and pleasure to speak with Professor Hoffmann because he's such an inspiration to me. I had the pleasure of meeting him at in his office in Cornell several times. And every time we spoke, I felt that time just flies away and so many things to discuss about science, art, nature, Judaism, humanity, and so forth. So today, I'm hosting him in my podcast, and I'm super excited about that. Good evening, Dr. Hoffmann.
Yes, good evening, David. I'm so happy to talk to you.
Thank you so much for spending the time with me, and I'm already excited and looking forward to it. So, as I said, your life story has been amazing. You came to the States when you were 12, and you got the Nobel Prize when you were 44. And there is so much to discuss about your scientific career and your artistic ambitions and achievements and educational and philosophy. But first I want to ask, it's a silly question, it's a childish question, but I have to get it off my chest.
Yes.
So how is it like to get a Nobel Prize?
How is it like to get the Nobel Prize? So you may not like the answer.
Okay.
People want to think that it's a surprise. That is a journalistic attitude. We in science are so well interconnected that when you do something good, something that is potentially of Nobel Prize caliber, you know it, for God's sake, and your fellows know it. And it's even you get invitations, and also people who nominate you for the Nobel Prize. There is a list of nominators possible. They tell you about it.
Really? Are they supposed to?
Something of it rubs off on them. Or it's a cultural thing. For instance, let me tell you a story. Before our Nobel Prize, about 5 years before, a number of countries have committees in order to be sure that anyone who possibly could get a Nobel Prize from that country should get it. Japan had such a committee. So they did their reasoning, and they thought that Woodward and Hoffman, if combined with Fukui, would get a Nobel Prize possibly. So what did they do? They were Japanese, so there's a cultural overlay. And they went and asked, not me, but they went to Professor Woodward, because he was the senior chemist, of course, and I was just the junior one. They went and asked him, may we nominate you together with Professor Fukui for a Nobel Prize?
Wow.
Woodward said, a committee came, 3 or 4 Japanese chemists.
I didn't know that.
So it's that kind of a thing. Woodward, of course, called me and laughed about it and said, of course.
Well, Woodward had his Nobel Prize by then, right?
Yes, he did. He did. And that was long overdue. So you know about it beforehand. And the first few times when you know that you are nominated by one way or another, it's very exciting, and you wait for the day when those things are announced. That day is announced by the Nobel Committee in Sweden.
Mm-hmm.
But after a few years, if you are a sane human being and not obsessed by the Nobel Prize, so there are also scientists who are reasonable candidates who are obsessed by it then, and their whole life is affected by it. But it wasn't in my case. It wasn't in Woodward's. After a while, you relax, and then when it comes, it comes. Of course, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. It came at a very bad time because my stepfather had died 1 month before.
Oh.
I had a father who was killed in the Holocaust. My mother remarried. I had a stepfather who had lost his wife. And it was sad that he did not live to that day. But
your mother did. But your mother did.
My mother did, and she enjoyed every moment of it. My mother
I
did,
bet.
and I brought my uncle from Israel, my closest living relative, Yehuda Safran, who was retired from being the head of the police academy in Tivon, and he came with his wife to the ceremony, and we had a good time.
Oh, nice, wonderful. Think about the Nobel Prize or prizes in general. We educate our students to be curious, to follow their curiosity, to try to do something useful, and yet here in academia, in science, prestige is really the currency, is the prestige of the journals we publish in, and the prestige of the prizes we get. So we're definitely sending a double message. Did you feel pressure from before the Nobel Prize? Did you feel pressure of pursuing this kind of prestige to succeed in your career?
No, I was very lucky. I always got to do what I wanted to do, and I didn't have any pressure. There came, after the Nobel Prize, some problems, and again, some of them you might not expect. Let me tell you about those. Not that you asked directly about it, but surviving the Nobel Prize, if you get it when you're young, is a bit of a problem. One of the things is that your work gets evaluated after the Nobel Prize. Your scientific work, in my case, gets evaluated more strongly than before. Then if an American author, Toni Morrison, won the Nobel Prize, or the same would be true for the Israeli author who won, Yehoshua, who won the prize, his next novel will be reviewed in a different tone than the ones before. The other thing that happens is, I am sorry to say, if you think that scientists are rational human beings devoid of jealousy and envy, then you are not living in this world. And what happens is that there are people who are envious of one getting the Nobel Prize. And where does jealousy and envy come out? It comes out, as Freud would tell you, in the dark, when you think you are not seen by other people. Okay? What is the dark for scientists? It's when you evaluate another person's paper or proposal. On papers, you have a chance. But what you get is things like this. Whereas formerly, before the Nobel Prize, they would say, this is lousy work, I don't understand this, here is what's wrong. After the Nobel Prize, they say, I would not expect a Nobel laureate to do such terrible work. Now, who does that please? Only the person who does it, and doesn't please them for very long, because Yetzer Hara has seized them, and they are expressing a very human tendency, and that is of jealousy and envy. When it happens on proposals, I mean proposals to agencies for support, that can be fatal. And I, at one point after the Nobel Prize, lost all my funding from the only place I could get it, which was the National Science Foundation. I recovered because people are good about it, and I did come back. But the other thing that is a problem after the Nobel Prize is that people ask the question, this is along the lines of that next novel, and they ask the question, what have you done for me lately? Now, or what are you going to do next? Okay. Now, if you have been fortunate enough not to ask that question before, if enough people after ask that question, what are you going to do lately? What's the next painting you're going to do? What's the next
second album?
Right.
The problem of the second album.
Yeah. So then you begin to ask the question of yourself, you see, and that is difficult. That is, it makes you self-conscious instead of, you begin to think about the importance of things instead of doing the thing. I've been fortunate. I did not succumb to any of the other lures of becoming the president of the Technion or some other equivalent administrative and management. I did not find an institute. I remained a chemist, and I'm very proud that I did very good inorganic and solid state chemistry after the quantum chemistry applied to organic. I'm very specific here because I'm very proud. I'm much more proud of receiving the ACS award in inorganic chemistry than of almost anything else. Wow. Because all that work was done after the Nobel Prize.
Wow. Wow.
So that's why I kept on being a scientist. I kept it on until I was really retired 3 years ago.
Yeah, and I think you gave the kind of the announcement that you're going to keep being a scientist. I think what I when I read about this, I thought that was a brilliant move. Actually, in your Nobel lecture, if I'm not mistaken, you introduced the concept of isolobal analogies or isolobal symmetry, which was fascinating. So you're coming to the Nobel Prize and you're saying, guys, I have a new idea. I'm moving forward. I'm not stopping here.
Not many people do that. Actually, the Nobel Foundation wanted the other direction, retrospective, and it makes sense. But I was, maybe because I was younger, I was a little ornery. I was a little resistant, and I decided I have a good news story to tell for anyone who looked at the isolobal reaction story, that the orbitals of inorganic fragments resemble those of organic fragments, could see that I was still using, there are two things. One is, and this is for the chemists in the audience, I was using molecular orbital ideas in the similar frontier orbital way, but in another part of science, okay? And I did that again later for solid state chemistry. And the other thing was that I did it simply, but yet with paying attention to experiment. The spirit of the isolobal of the Nobel lecture was very much in the spirit of what Woodward and I did. But there it was applied to something else.
Yeah. But to the non-chemists in the crowd, just a brief word. Your achievements, what you got the Nobel Prize for, so the Woodward Hoffmann rules. I think that if you don't study chemistry, you're missing out on. This is the heart of what you're missing out on. The ability to understand nature intricately by applying beautiful concepts of not just how atoms move, but how their electron clouds or orbitals, how they move and interact, how their symmetries affect the reaction outcomes. I find it one of the most beautiful chemistries out there. And indeed, you continue to expand it and to take it to other places. So this work being so creative, and my podcast is dealing with this topic of creativity from different perspectives, and maybe the main message I'm trying to convey and to focus on is that creativity has the aha moment, it has the eureka moment, but it is far beyond that. It is you need to have stuff before that, and you need to have after it. Can you look at your creative career? It can be from science and not necessarily from science, and identify moments of creativity beyond the aha moment, or stages of creativity beyond this moment.
Well, I'm a little down on eureka moments in general. They again are, for the same reason I was down on people and the Nobel Prize being a surprise. That's what journalists ask you. What journalists ask me, not you. But the same way, eureka moments often, and incidentally, we are seeing this now, David, in Jeff Seaman, a historian of chemistry, is doing an in-depth study of this discovery that I did with Woodward about how orbitals control the course of chemical reactions, which was rewarded by the Nobel Prize. Woodward did not live long enough to get it, and instead I got it very appropriately with a Japanese chemist, Kenichi Fukui. Jeff Seaman is doing an in-depth study of this moment, helped out, except it's not a moment. It's stretched out over 5 years. There were 4 or 5 papers which made a fantastic impact in 1965. And then there was a long paper 4 years later that Woodward and I did, which really had also new things in it, but it really sealed the discovery. Jeff Seaman is going through how this discovery is made. He's doing this because he can do this because in that period, I kept notebooks. I'll show you what the notebooks look like. They look
really?
like this. They are laboratory notebooks, rather large. And in them, there are pages upon pages.
Wow.
I don't write many words down, but there are pictures of orbitals. There are summaries of calculations. Here you will see this. I think it's sort of fun for people to see this. You see the numbers there? Those are the results of my calculation. The numbers came out on computer paper, accordion folded computer paper. I transcribed the important parts here. I kept during this period 15 notebooks like this. And with this material, Seaman can reconstruct the flow of the discovery. Wow. I have not forgotten your eureka point, your eureka moment, but I just wanted to connect it to this real life story. As we
this
go
is heaven for a historian of science. These notebooks of yours, it's like the gift of his life.
I know. This doesn't happen very often. Moreover, the person who wrote them is alive. And he can talk to me. But he can't talk to Woodward, unfortunately. But he can talk to me. And we have spent countless hours in Zoom conferences and in person, reconstructing the flow of the discovery. And of course, it's beautifully elegant in the papers. Papers are a sanitized summary of the process and their effect. They're also in a pedagogical. I learned early on that the pedagogy was important. I learned a lot from my teaching introductory chemistry. And I learned that writing a scientific paper, if you want anyone to read it, is not that different from talking to a first-year chemistry class, because I'm trying to reach an audience. In that audience are people who are falling asleep, people who are tired, people who want to understand, and people who don't. It's like all the categories at a Passover Seder that you're trying to tell the story to. I'm telling them the story, and the only way I have to reach them, to reach their hearts and minds, is through my words. And so the paper is those words. They are concentrated. If one is lucky, like in the Watson and Crick paper, there is a truth and there is a poem there. That is, after you see that, you can understand why that paper was important. I think many people have the feeling about our papers in a similar way, that a piece of the world was revealed. But on the way there, it was a mess. It was complicated. There were partial solutions. We have identified only one clear eureka moment in those 4 and 5 initial papers. And that is, I'm going to get here a little technical, but I had already studied one reaction which was easy and is a common reaction in organic chemistry called the Diels-Alder reaction. I had studied that, and everything was normal. And I didn't understand that the world could be otherwise until I studied with the computer, writing those numbers that I just showed you in that book, until I studied a reaction which was different from the one that was easy. And that was two ethylenes coming together to give a 4-membered ring. And that turned out to have a high barrier, and that checked some experiments that were relevant. But the difference was so striking in the orbitals that I immediately saw the whole picture of cycloadditions. I not only saw 4 + 2 makes 6, that was easy, and 2 + 2 makes 4, that was difficult, very difficult. But I also saw that 6 + 4 was easy, and 6 + 6 was difficult, and so on. So there was a eureka moment in that story, but most of the time there was a winding process of partial understanding, and sometimes the historian of science gets angry with me. He says, "Why didn't you see this?" Or he says, "You've already said that." Okay, so I have already said it in the earlier page in the notebooks. But it's not that I didn't believe it myself. It's that you have to arrive at the same result several times in order to believe it sometimes. Or sometimes when you get at it in a different way from the first way, then you really begin to believe it. So the process but also the process was very involuted, meandering.
Yeah. Wow, that definitely ties with many things I've read about, and that is fascinating. So there is something about. I can go from the science story to your life story a bit. I didn't mention it in the beginning, but you are a Holocaust survivor, and you spent about 18 months, if I remember correctly, from ages 5 to 7, being hidden with your mother in an attic in a school, right, in Poland.
Yes.
In Ukraine, what is today Ukraine.
What is today Ukraine?
Yeah.
And was Poland. Yes, I'm the last generation of Hitler's gifts to America, and I say it to make fun of it, but it was not easy at the time. We were, in fact, the largest family group to survive from the town. In the town were perhaps, the town was called Zlochów. And now in Ukrainian today, Zolochiv. It was a town of 12,000 people, a typical bourgeois Austro-Hungarian town. This was not a shtetl, nor was it a big city like Lvov or Lviv or Kiev. It was a town. And in that town, 1/3 of the population was Jewish, 1/3 Polish, 1/3 Ukrainian. There were tensions of various kinds, and there was coexistence. The culture was definitely Polish, though, my mother's birth certificate is in German and in Polish. That's because this was Austria-Hungary before World War I. So, and my mother went to school in Vienna, to the university, because we had strong ties with Austria because of that previous rule.
You were a child. It was an age that you remember things, 5 to 7. Do you remember the experience?
I don't remember that much, but I remember a little. And a lot is from what my parents told me. I have not written anything. I have written an autobiographical play. I'll show it to you because authors are always interested in selling books. This is called Something That Belongs to You. And it is a play about my mother and me, an autobiographical play. The names are changed. We could talk about that, why they were changed. but it is the story of our survival. We were 7 people survived out of 200 who survived out of a population of 3,000 Jews
Wow.
in that town.
Wow.
So that is the
Wow.
dimensions of the loss in all of Poland, in
Yes,
all of that
yes.
part of the world of the Jewish community. We survived in 3 different ways. In 4 and then 5 of us in hiding, and then by a good Ukrainian family, as you mentioned, for 15 months at the end of the war. 2 others survived in hiding in a cellar under a cellar, a bunker in town, and 1 more in the forest. So all of them survived by staying out of the ghetto and the concentration camps.
Mm-hmm.
We were in a labor camp in 42, but we then went into hiding in 43. There is a typical survival story. There is typically a person who helped. In our case, a good Ukrainian. We have kept in touch with that family since that time, to this day.
Definitely not to belittle what they did. It was great. It was risks to their lives and so on. But you were also paying them, right?
We were paying them, but I think the payment was not why these people did it. Other people took payment and still betrayed those who they hid.
Yeah.
I would like people to understand the logistics of this family who hid us out. It was a school teacher and his wife, and they had 3 small children who were my age and younger. And we were hidden in the attic of a 1-room schoolhouse where the school teacher taught in a village, not in Złotów, but in a village called Univ. And in that village, there were 50 houses. And one school room for all of them. This school teacher, with his family of husband, wife, and 3 children, in the attic of a schoolhouse, kept 5 people for 15 months.
That's very hard.
4 adults and 1 child. What I'd like you to imagine, or your listeners to imagine rather, is the logistics of feeding 5 people for 15 months.
During these times.
We did not eat well, but we were fed. We ate what they ate. But he and his brother would go out at night and buy food from neighboring villages. And I think one way to think of what we paid them is it was for that, at a minimal, and it was for more. But in general, of course, the whole question of Ukrainian-Jewish relations is a complex one, and it has been swept under the rug for the 2nd time. I'll explain what I mean by current events, and that is the Russian aggression against Ukraine.
Indeed.
Because the first time it was swept under the rug was when the Soviets came back. And it's the Soviets' fault that time too. The reason was they punished the Ukrainians who collaborated with the Nazis, the Soviets, when they returned in 45. And there were Ukrainian partisans fighting the Soviets for 5, 6 years, 7 years after the war from the forest. But they punished the Ukrainians, but they punished the Ukrainians for giving away the communists to the Nazis. They did not single out the Jewish, the incredible, obscene concentration of the Nazi propaganda on Jews as their enemies. And somehow the Ukrainians themselves were not allowed to recognize their complicity in collaborating with the Nazis.
Yes.
And now, in recent times, of course, we want to help the Ukrainians. There is no question about who is the villain here. It is Putin and his gang, living to see with a dream of a great Russia that never was, and then attacking Ukraine is crazy. So we have to help. But in the process, especially in the Western Ukraine, where we came from, what is now Western Ukraine, but then was Eastern Poland. The people in that part still remember the people who were most anti-Semitic during World War II and who participated in betraying the Jews to the Nazis. They still celebrate them as patriots. And and now is not the time. Will there ever be a time? I don't know.
Yes. So you came to the States after, not immediately after the war. You were in
we were refugees in Austria and Germany after some time in Poland. And it took us 5 years to get to the United States.
Wow.
We almost went to Israel, but we did not. One rather amusing thing, a story I'll tell your authors is, English was my sixth language.
Sixth language?
Yes. The others were Yiddish and Polish, which were my mother languages, and then Ukrainian in the streets. And I also went to part of the first grade in Ukrainian, and then German, and and Hebrew also at that point. At age 11 in Munich, just in the year prior to getting a visa to go to the United States in 1948-49, I went to a school where everything was taught in Hebrew in München to prepare kids for Aliyah. That was the reason. It was not a religious school, but it was and I learned my English from a textbook in Germany. The textbook was in Hebrew, but it was teaching English. Can you imagine that?
Wow. But I cannot imagine that, and I cannot imagine that you learned the language when you were 12 and you became a poet in this language.
Yes,
and
it's
you
the
became
only
a poet.
language I can write poetry now.
That's very interesting.
So when I go to the other places, the other languages flood into my mind. And I knew Hebrew much better than I do now.
What is the role of language in poetry is obvious. This is the fabric of life. But does language have a role in science? Does it really matter, or can we just communicate in Esperanto/AI kind of code that goes beyond language?
I think you need the language too, and the other parts, the chemical structures, the numbers and the manipulations and the orbitals, just to be very specific to what I do and what you know, but the chemical structures, which are such an important part of what we do. Someone once asked me to write something about writing across the disciplines, and they wanted me to talk about writing chemistry, and I said I can't talk about writing chemistry. I can write something for you about writing and drawing chemistry. And what I meant is I cannot conceive. So here I was being a traitor to physical chemists and chemical physicists. But I was thinking of the heart of chemistry, which is what you and I do, among other things, is we cannot conceive of doing that without drawing chemical structures.
Absolutely. We keep drawing.
Kind of, how did that evolve over 150 years of practice of doing and communicating it? Yeah. To ask your question, can one do the science with symbols? I don't think so. I think the words are necessary. The words of any language, I don't think any language. There are some people in this world who think that poetry cannot be written in Polish because it has all those funny combinations of consonants.
Wisława
Of course,
Szymborska?
poetry can be written in Polish.
One of my most favorite poets is Wisława Szymborska, who is Polish.
Yes.
So, to continue from language, I wanted to talk a bit about your poetry. And so a lot of your poetry is informed by science, and I like
some of it is.
Okay. And but before we spoke, you sent me 2 recent poems. You have a new book of poetry coming out, right?
Yes, I have some. I'm still writing. The poems that some of the poems are old, but some of them are just within the last 2 years. Occasioned, for instance, one by the Ukrainian-Russian events and by other things. And I have a book about art and science together with a Russian co-author, Alexander Svitin, which will be out next year.
Okay, very nice. And the poems that you sent...
Publishing books at my age. Well, I come from a world of books. There are books behind you, David.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Many more.
I have no books of the Talmud, but there are books behind them. And you and I live in a world of books. And I am very grateful for that world. I'm also grateful for the computer, and especially for me, it's been a tremendously enriching experience to be able to access information as readily as you and I can.
The poems that you sent me were very interesting. They were inspired by a passage in the Midrash, in the Pirkei Avot de Rabbi Natan.
That's right.
And the passage that they were inspired by, I will not read the full poems. First of all, I found the poems beautiful, and I found them meaningful. They spoke to me. They invoked many feelings in me, but also thought.
Well, the initial quotation from Yochanan ben Zakkai was quite amazing to me when I read it, and then when I could fill in the historical sense of what this meant to the Jewish people at a terrible moment when Vespasian was besieging Jerusalem, and when the whole Jewish nation was again in danger of extinction, that what he did to save the tradition. But it was just very interesting.
Yes. And this passage from the Midrash that you quote there says that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai says that if you have a sapling of a tree, so if you have a small tree, when Mashiach comes, you should first plant the sapling and then go meet Mashiach.
Yes, and, that's a poem by itself. It's to me, it's also a summary of a positive outlook on Jewish life forever. That is, this sapling represents that we should continue no matter how difficult things are.
And I found it also in an interesting way parallel the Midrash to the halacha that says, the rule that says that when we start building the temple, hopefully very soon, everyone has to go, and the only group that is exempt are school children. They need to keep learning.
I see. That's interesting. I didn't know that. That is a good footnote.
And
so writing poetry, yes. So those poems will be in my next book, those 2 poems. And the second one, I had a little bit of fun while also being serious about what would happen if the Messiah would come, imagining that. And
that meeting.
As if that would solve all our problems. It will not necessarily. But the world will be changed. And I had a little fun with the Romans, who were so good at building baths wherever they went. and who
Yeah,
loved
I loved it. I just smiled when I read about the Romans building the mikvahs for the Jews now.
I love that. That's
Yeah,
just what they would do. You
yeah,
can see Roman baths in the city, in the town of Bath in the UK. And
yeah.
then I go to Morocco on a visit, and I visit some Roman ruins in Volubilis, an outpost of the Moroccan Empire, of the Roman Empire.
Roman.
And there is a bath and a mosaic with fish in it. Amazing.
Yeah,
And
yes.
they also used lead for the pipes. So there's some
Yeah,
chemistry.
yeah.
And Primo Levi in his The Periodic Table, one of the great classics of writing about chemistry by a non-chemist.
That's it.
But in it, he
Wait,
has one
by a
chapter
chemist.
about,
Primo Levi was a chemist.
yes, he was a chemist.
Yeah, yeah, by a chemist. Yeah, yeah.
So uh, he was an industrial chemist, an analytical chemist by training. That chemistry helped save him at Auschwitz.
Yep.
And then he went
Good.
back and worked in industry for a long time. But he talks about, he has an early story from early in his life about a making lead, mining for lead. And then lead is relatively easy to reduce to the metal. That is, all you do is you actually roast it, and it's a lead sulfide. It's not a very healthy process. You heat the hell out of it, and the sulfur combines with the oxygen in the air and goes off as SO2, and that's why it's very nasty stuff. But
Yep.
lead is relatively low melting, so you don't have to heat it very high, and the lead flows out. And then the Romans built pipes out of lead, and they
Also
also,
malleable, right?
yeah,
Malleable.
malleable. But we can see the lead pipes, and they are stamped with the name of the emperor, but you can see them in some of the baths.
Yeah. And hence plumbing and PB is the
Plumbing
symbol in the
comes
periodic
from that.
table.
That's right,
Yeah.
plumbing in English.
So in the poem, one of the poems you mentioned that we are a stiff-necked people, and it's
Yes,
a lovely coincidence because
I was
it is
quoting.
actually literally today is the day that we read this expression said about the Jewish people twice in today's Torah reading, in this week's Torah reading, that we
Yes,
are a stiff-necked people, and it's and in some places it's not said as an insult, as a negative thing. There is a stiff-necked people for the better, lema'aliuta.
yes.
What do you think if there was something that you were stubborn about in your life? Something that was crucial to be stubborn about?
I can't think. Well, there was, in general, I'm a compromiser. I seek after peace, and that goes all the way from domestic relationships to relationships with people and in science. I was stubborn. I think I can think of two episodes. One is when I had a rebellious period, and it was not when I was a teenager, but later. When I was a teenager, I was not rebellious, but afterwards, in the early 20s, I got it in my head to go to the Soviet Union on a graduate student exchange when I was at Harvard in graduate school for a year.
That was in the 50s.
I married a woman who my parents didn't approve of. And so there was a period which involved some stubbornness in these things. Another episode was with a chemical side that some people will recognize. Was there came a point when E.J. Corey accused Woodward of essentially stealing his simple explanation of the orbital symmetry rules that we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one great scientist accusing another one, but he never confronted Woodward. He wanted me. He took it out on me and wanted me to tell Woodward what Corey, that this idea was really Corey's. The power relationships were such that at the time this work was done, Woodward was 47, at the top of his profession, about to receive the Nobel Prize. Corey was a recently arrived full professor and very established in his field, age 37, and I was a postdoc, 27. So
Wow.
instead of the Corey going to Woodward and staking his claim, he asked me to do it. And that there is a lesson there for students. Don't let that happen to you.
Don't get involved in power plays.
This is bad behavior. But at some point, Corey made the claim in a single sentence in a published paper. And I felt I had to respond to that. And I was stubborn there. There was some advice to just let it go. He's his own worst enemy. But I felt that I had to say something. And I did. There is an Angewandte Chemie article in 2004 where I talk about this. So those are little episodes of stubbornness. But in general, I'm in favor of compromise and of, even if necessary, of giving in order to achieve peace.
Yes.
So I don't know. Stubbornness is not a virtue for me, though I actually understand what you mean about the stiff-necked people. It's in a positive sense.
It's in the poem. I mean, Yochanan ben Zakkai didn't meet the Mashiach. We are still waiting, and we are pretty stubborn about this. We will wait.
Yeah, we can wait.
We can wait. Thank you so much for your time, dear Roald. It was so interesting
to talk, and there are so many things that we can talk about, from the science to human relations, and I'm very glad to see your programs and what you are talking about.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I hope at 120 you should stay healthy and happy and productive. Thank you.
Thank you.